Welcome back to Emerald and Lilywhite. This is episode 3. We are stoked to be here. We appreciate everyone's patience as we did take a week off last week for some scheduling conflicts, but we are stoked, as I said, to be live and ready to discuss all things Tottenham. There's a lot to go over. Before we get into all of that, I want to bring my co-host in. You all know him, Max. Max, what's going on, man?
Not much. It's been an exciting couple of weeks, just for soccer in general and Spurs as well. So I'm excited to talk about that. And yeah, hopefully that will distract us from the Seattle Heat right now, which is pretty brutal. So
you read my mind. I was just about to say that the Spurs transfer links are as hot as the weather here in Seattle. But yeah, for those who don't know, we assume most people listening are from Seattle at this point, but if you're not, it is toasty up here in the Pacific Northwest. It is hot, and we don't have AC very often up here. I fortunately am sitting in AC right now, but Max, I know you are not, correct?
yeah, I'm not. I'm downstairs at my apartment right now because my room is about 5 degrees hotter than the living room. So it's not great right now, but no, we'll make it through. It's only a couple of days.
Yep. There's always that week where we get beat up pretty bad by the heat. I always remember in the non-AC days, keeping cold towels in the fridge, right, and just draping them over me or whatever, keeping the dog cool however we could. But yeah, this is not a Seattle weather podcast, so we will move on and we'll jump into Spurs. We got a super exciting agenda today. Like Max and I have both said, everybody, it is there's been a lot since we last spoke, right? The transfer market not only opened, but started moving, right? We've got a mega signing in both of our opinions to get to, but all kinds of links as well. Outgoing and incoming, of course. But let's rip into it, Max. I think we both want to start with the shiny new object that Spurs have acquired since we last spoke, and that is one Archie Gray, who I need to give you credit for. We're probably the first Spurs fan on the planet to start paying attention to the not only the link to Archie, but the player that he was, right? You brought it to my attention way back before any of this was a reality, but I'm just going to give you the floor, man. Talk to me about Archie Gray.
Yeah, so I was really high on him last year, coming up into the lead system. I believe he came into the first team when he was like 15, so that would have been a couple years ago now, but performed really well and was actually like a right back for them in the championship. But yeah, throughout his youth played CDM, and I thought that fit our profile perfectly. And I think it was like late May. I was really into the idea of signing Archie, and then some more links started popping up, and dream to reality. And you take that for 40 million, but it's really 30 because we got 10 back for Joe Rodon going there. So it's not as expensive. It kind of reminds me of the Winks Madison situation last summer. And you've got a huge talent who's only 18 who can play in the first team and doesn't need a loan because he already has that championship experience starting most games for Leeds. And I'm just stoked, man. And I'm really curious as to what Ange is going to do with him, because obviously he does suit an inverted fullback like to a T. So if he does decide to go that route, or decide for him to maybe be the next 6 for the team, but between him, Bergvall, and Sarr, like we might have our midfield sorted for at least the next 7 or 8 years there. So it's just buzzing. Yeah.
Honestly, with regards to the midfield, what you just said, the prospect of that trio together, not only now, but more so than now, like you said, 7 years from now, I think maybe 3 years from now is when you really start to see that trio start to cook, right? But I think Sarr's the oldest there at 21 years of age, I believe. And so, yeah, the longevity is there. Spurs are really going after signings that are not only capable of playing right now, but have a very long shelf life ahead of them, assuming injuries don't occur and all of that, right? We never know. But we're really going after a very specific target. They've got to be Premier League ready, in our opinion, but also very young, and somebody that we can build and lean upon. And I'm excited to see a guy like Gray come in. Like you said, he can play an inverted fullback on either side of the pitch, honestly, right? He even filled in as a left wing back at times. Very talented number 6. I think he comes in and I think he immediately competes for 3 positions, if I'm being completely honest. Not really. We'll call it 2, right? Because I don't think he's brought in
not left back. Yeah.
He's not coming to play left.
Yeah, destinies.
Exactly. 100%. But yeah, I think he's competing for the right back spot and he's competing for the 6th spot. If I had to guess, I would say he usurps Basuma before he usurps Pedro Porro, right?
Agreed.
But I really think the 6 is where he's going to make his name for Tottenham. He's incredibly press resistant. I've watched all these videos of him since we signed him, right? And his ability to get himself out of tight spaces with the ball at his feet is pretty phenomenal. I really am impressed with what I'm seeing.
And yeah, you look at like the compilations, obviously these are his like the top of his game, but when you see like when he's getting pressed like on the half turn, like you see the foundation there and like he is really silky and like that's kind of a archetype we've been missing at the 6, like maybe since Dembele was rocking our colors, but you can see it in like I don't want to make like crazy comparisons already. Like I need to cool my jets, but like you think of him like holding there. But he can also go forward like kind of like like I think of his build like a little bit like Luka Modric, maybe not as prolific as of a passer, but like in those tight spaces, definitely has the control and the vision to get out of those, and it's perfect for the system that we're trying to play. And I think especially with Christian Romero and like the fullbacks that we have, like would work brilliantly together. So
yeah, it's well said. I honestly agree with you on the Modric piece. I mean, I would be hesitant to say that I think he'll ever.
I'm saying Spurs Modric. You know what I'm saying?
For sure. Yeah. Well, and honestly, there's some really prominent names talking about this kid being an absolute generational talent. There's a gentleman I follow on Twitter at HB Brooks, I believe, and I'm gonna get that before the end of the show and give this gentleman some real credit. But his name is Harry Brooks, and he's a professional development coach, big Spurs fan, but he works with a lot of guys through his own agency who are coming up through the ranks of championship and Premier League level teams. But he talks a lot about Archie Gray being that generational talent and said that Archie is the type of player who could play anywhere on the pitch, bar goalkeeper and probably even goalkeeper, right? But play anywhere on the pitch and do it really well. He said you could even ask him to play as a 9, and by Christmas, he's scoring goals and he's got it figured out because he just has that ability to play football rather than a position, right? Which I think not only is the type of player the Spurs are looking for, but it's kind of the way the game is going, right? It's calling for these guys that are incredibly versatile, can play numerous positions on the pitch and aren't confined to 1 or 2 roles on the pitch, right? It's the Pep Guardiola, from a macro is really what it is. But this Archie Gray fella fits right into the modern game, I think, swimmingly. And $40 million we just paid for an 18-year-old. I think you would assume that speaks to his quality, but I also think it's worth pointing out that the club is spending $40 million on an 18-year-old, but they're doing it in a way where data and insight and all these new methods we're using to scout players tell you that's the right move, because I've seen us spend $33 million on Sessegnon. Don't want that experience again, right? I've seen us go and spend even $65 million on a Tanguy. That was a failure, right? But when I see what we've done,
Clark.
Yeah, thank you. Exactly, right. It's a great example. And so I think we got to a point as a club where we said, okay, we're in the stadium. We've got a little bit of money to spend. Let's start going after guys that the rest of the world's going after. And I think we found out pretty quickly that just wasn't an effective method for us as a club, right? We need to go back to what we did in the days of signing the Modric's and the Bales. And we need to just do that a little bit better with a little more money. And we're signing guys like Bergvall and Gray. And who else am I missing? Vuskovic, the center back, right? Who isn't
Like
with the club yet.
Ashley Phillips.
Ashley Phillips. Well said. Yeah. So all these guys and Vuskovic, that's one that we'll talk about a year from now, I think, right? That's an exciting one. But yeah, point is, the club is doing it right, and I think they're building for the future, as we've already talked about. So super exciting. Yeah, let's move on. I think there's a lot of links that we want to talk about, but before we do get into those links, just to highlight quick on the on the players returning back to Hotspur Way, I believe yesterday.
Yeah, 2 days ago, but yeah.
2 days ago. Thank you. We're recording this live on Monday, so they would have returned on the Saturday, the 6th of July. Always exciting to see the fellas rock back up to the training center, and always got social media admins, right, doing all kinds of fun videos and stuff to get us acclimated to the squad again. A lot of names that we would expect to be back by now, like a Madison, who obviously wasn't at the Euros. We've got Destiny, who wasn't at the Euros. But there's a couple other guys. I'll say that again.
Healthy Destiny.
No doubt about it. Yeah. Which is super important. Pedro Porra, another one that unfortunately didn't make the Euros, but he's back. And I think from a Spurs perspective, it's wonderful to see leaders like that already back at the club, right? I think if those three guys are still competing in Europe, Destiny wouldn't be, obviously, but the other two could have been at this point, right? And it definitely benefits the club that they're back. But there's a few names, too, that I watched them return, and it just kind of reminds me that we still have work to do, right? The first name on that list is Brian Heel. Are you expecting Brian to be at Tottenham at the end of this window, or what does that look like?
No, I don't, unfortunately, because I'd say I'm semi-notorious for being a huge Brian Hill fan, but it clearly hasn't worked. And it's one of those signings that we can point to. Like, we really didn't do the research. Like, he was never ready for the Premiership, and like, I don't know if he ever will be. And maybe he's just a player that is good in spurts, but like maybe can't stay healthy, has some fitness problems, is good in Spain, but isn't ready for like the physicality that England brings. And I think that's the case. And I think we will see him go. I don't know if we're turning any sort of like sum. I doubt he goes for any more than 10 million if I had to guess. Yeah. So it's a bit disappointing, especially because I love the guy. Like, the fact that he hasn't scored for us is just, it just hurts, man. I just want one goal for Brian Hill before he departs. But yeah.
No, I feel you, man. I'm bummed to see how it's all transpired. First of all, I'm obsessed with Eric Lamela, and he went the other way, right? So I'll always have a bit of a heartburn on the Brian Hill experiment because Lamela went the other way. But I was super excited about Brian. He's been great in Spain. I mean, his loan back to Sevilla 2 seasons ago was fantastic. He was a huge part of their run to the Europa League final. So, yeah, I think if he finds himself back in a league that allows for a little bit more time on the ball, and where a league that allows for someone with his technical ability to benefit from that technical ability, where it's not all just, power and pace and brawn. The Premier League, of course, has all of these technical attributes that are important, but it's fast and it's physical, like you said. So I think he'll do really well in Spain. I think he'd do really well in Italy. Another name that's back at N17, and this one is a doozy for me, but Sergio Reguilon. That's another one that's super disappointing for me because he had such a high ceiling when we brought him in, right? And him and Mourinho became buds pretty quickly, but it just hasn't worked out for that guy either, huh?
No, it hasn't. And I mean, he had a successful season. I'd say 1920. He was one of our better players because of how that season did transpire. That wasn't that hard to do, but he just can't. He just doesn't cut it defensively. Like, he's really fast. He's okay on the ball, but he works hard. But I think defensively, it's just, he's not good enough. And we saw it in preseason last year, and then we saw it during the season this year. Like, when you're not consistently starting for Brentford and Man United's terminating your loan, even though he was good there, I thought halfway through the season, then clearly you're not good enough for Spurs, and he wouldn't get into the team anyways. So I think that's an easy one to see go.
100% agree with you. He's not sniffing minutes at all. I have a really good friend, Shuban, who some of Seattle Spurs folks know well. But Shuban has always said that Reguilon, had he not been left-footed, would be no higher than a championship level player. And in the early days of me hearing that, I thought that was a little bit harsh. And we all know, you folks from England, you can be a little bit harsh on your players, right? But of course, I kid. We love everyone from the UK, but no, I think I think what he's saying, there's some truth to it, right? That I just think he's quite average, and I say that with the utmost respect because he's 10 times a footballer I'll ever be, if not 100 times a footballer I'll ever be, right? But from a pure Premier League perspective, I just don't think it's going to work out. What about Solomon, man? I think that's an interesting one because he's only been at the club for a season and was injured for 75% of it, if not more. But do you think he's going to continue to get a look at Spurs, or are we maybe thinking about trying to get something back on that investment?
I mean, we didn't invest anything, so it's all profit.
It's
all profit, and I'm taking that. I'm taking that because I think we can get something for him. And if his like sale comes at the expense of us bringing in like a Due or Chiesa or someone like that who's actually like gonna start. I mean, I know Solomon did start some games, but now it's just a tough road back. And like he was there kind of when Brennan Johnson was just getting integrated, and now we've seen him play like a full season. So he's ahead in the pecking order, and I don't know how many opportunities there's going to be. And I totally forgot about Timo Werner, that he's still on the team.
Yeah.
So Werner as well, I'd prefer. I think he's more dynamic, so I think we can cash in on Solomon. And I think a good portion of the fan base is not a huge fan of him as well. So, yeah.
I agree with you. And yeah, I forgot that we technically didn't invest anything into bringing him in, and that's a sensitive subject as to how that happened, right? And Max and I understand that and would never mean to make light of that, but from a business perspective, he didn't cost us anything, and I think if we can pull 7 to 10 million for the guy, fantastic business for a season of wages or whatever it is. But like you said, there's just not a whole lot of room for a guy like him who is a tidy little player, but he's not gonna beat out Son or Kulusevski or Brennan Johnson or anybody like that, a Timo Werner, like you said. So I think it's best to move him on. And then the last player, I'm going to let you wax lyrically on him as well, but Bergvall is in the building, which I know each and every Spurs fan across the planet is buzzing about. But what's your take on Bergvall? And maybe the question is, how quickly do you think he assimilates into the squad?
I obviously need to see preseason matches before I can make that clear of a decision. But like for me, like I want to see him in the squad from day one. And if Ange thinks alone would be best for his development, then that's okay with me. But I think he's definitely good enough from what I've seen. And in an international level with Sweden, like he's going to be in their first team when they're playing matches, which means he's, in my opinion, good enough to at least be a squad player for Spurs if you're an international at like a pretty decent country. I know they didn't qualify for the Euros, but I would love to see him play. And I think he'd be great competition for Madison in that 10 role. So I'm really excited about Lucas.
I love it, man. Yeah, honestly, I'm right there with you. I think Bergvall and Archie Gray, for that matter, need to be in the squad in the 18. I think it's time to get them ready. I really do think that they're both going to be in and around the mix, and that's super super exciting. I'm a midfield nut, right? I love midfielders, but I love basing everything that I'm analyzing from a match perspective around what I'm seeing in the midfield and then kind of branching it out from there, right? And I think, for reasons you just got to and for reasons we talked about around Archie Gray earlier, we've got a really exciting contingent, and I'm just of the belief that it's time to get that thing, built and stabilized now instead of a year from now. So let's go. All right, let's talk about incomings. On that note, I'll just talk about who's going to be in the squad. Squad's got some work to do, I think, to be ready for match week 1. I think in the midfield, it looks like we're pretty healthy and steady and ready to go. But up top, we got a lot of work to do, and that's where the majority of these links we're going to talk about come from. There's one defender we'll discuss, but I want to start with Eze. It comes out today that Spurs are ready to trigger the $60 million release clause that Crystal Palace has in his contract. First of all, do you believe that? And second of all, how excited would you be if you woke up and saw that we were bringing him in?
One, I do not believe that. Two, I would be ecstatic. I think I would be over the moon. I woke up for the Archie Gray signing and I was so pumped. I was like, Archie Gray, wow, this is the most excited I've been about a player in a long time, because I actually knew about him. Like, if I had known what Van de Ven was going to be a season from now, I probably would have been more excited about that. But Archie Gray, I was pumped. Eze, I would be over the moon. Like, you've seen what he's done for England, even just in the recent game against Switzerland. And he kind of changed the game. Like, he was electric every time he touched the ball. And that's exactly what we've discussed on previous episodes. It's what Spurs are missing, whether it be on the wing or be in that 10 role. We need someone who's dynamic, who's willing to be a bit more direct and take on their man and beat them. And he is a fantastic playmaker, and that's why he's in the England squad, and that's why Maddison isn't. And based off the last season, he was definitely better. And anytime you can bring in an England international into the team, it's just a home run for me, because of how good that team is and how good he has been.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. There's not much I can add to what you just said, other than to say I think he walks straight into the first team right away. And I don't mean the first team, I mean the first 11, right? He walks straight into the starting 11. And that's the type of signing we need. We have done a wonderful job of building for the future, and we really need to bring in some heavy hitters that can make an impact day one. So they got to be Premier League proven. And then, like you said, we're talking an England international who's making a massive impact at Euros. Get him in. Let's go. And I think if the club really does go and drop 60 million on a release clause, it tells me that we're not playing games anymore, and we're ready to go after trophies. As much as I hate to say money equates to trophies, it's not always exactly apples to apples, but we all know you got to spend to compete now, and I'd love to see Spurs show that they're there and ready to do it. Speaking of which, there's a couple other names that I think will pack a bit of a fee if we go out and get him, and it's because both of them are Premier League proven. But we'll start with Ivan Toney. I think the links have cooled down a little bit to Ivan Toney, right? Some of that's probably Eurocentric. But if we want to go after a Premier League proven goal scorer who's extremely effective in the box, I don't think we need to look any further than him.
Oh yeah, he's another thing that we've been missing, especially with how good he is, like, technically in tight spaces up top, and he's also a great poacher, and we just need someone who's going to finish those chances. And another guy who's made impacts for England when he has come on during the Euros. And that's probably making his price go up, which isn't awesome for Spurs. But you can see, like, what he does on the pitch there and how confident he is. And I think he thinks he's the best player in the world, and we need more players like that in our team.
Yep. Yeah, well said. That confidence that it takes to perform at the tip top, I think he's got it for sure. The other one that I think may come with a bit of a price tag because they're out of the Premier League and Premier League proven and all of that is Pedro Neto. I think some of that's in the air because of his injury record, but it does sound like Spurs are heavily invested in signing him from everything that we're seeing. Obviously has been effective at Wolves. I think, like I said, he's a little bit injury prone. Last season, I believe he only had 20 appearances in the Premier League and then a couple in the Cups, right? So it doesn't always feature, but what's your take on Pedro Neto?
I think that he would be a good signing. I'm not as bullish on him because of that injury history you cited. But when he's on the pitch, he's pretty electric. And I think of him kind of like a Timo Werner-esque player. Like the end product isn't always there, but he's going to be one that gets in those dangerous areas and creates chances for the other attackers. And I think that luckily we have wingers in place right now that are serviceable if he is not available for a chunk of the season. And I think with rotation, he should be available because obviously Wolves were relying on him. He was like their best player. He's playing every day. I don't think that's the case when you've got guys like Brendan Johnson, Werner, all fighting for those spots, and there's only two of them. So
yeah, well said. I completely agree with you. I think it would benefit him tremendously to not be the biggest fish in a medium pond, you could say, at Wolves, right? I think it would benefit him to be a normal sized fish in a larger pond, which is Spurs, right? I think I wouldn't call him a small fish because he's done a lot, but if you think of a contingent of Sonny, Werner, Kulusevski, Brendan Johnson, Pedro Neto, I think that's a really serviceable 5 options at wing. And then if you start talking Eze, who can play on the wing for sure, right? You add a 6th guy into the mix who's going to be one of the best players in that group, right, in Eze. So I think that would be some pretty incredible depth that I would never have believed Spurs to have access to, right? So it's just really nice to see all these links up top because I think more than anything, Ange needs to have a long list of weapons to deploy up top, right? If we really want to go compete for things, I think there's got to be nasty competition to the point where Sonny's wondering if he's playing even, right? Because it's that tight and competitive up at the top. And on that note, if you have that depth out wide, maybe Sonny gets some more minutes up the middle, right? We know that he can score goals. I don't think it was always perfect last year, but Heung-min Son is going to put the ball in the back of the net. He's a pure finisher, and I think it's more on Ange and the system to fit Sonny up top than it is for Sonny to be asked to just like go score goals, right? It's a lot more than that. So,
and I think Sonny can definitely play up top. And I'm thinking in that specific scenario, if we get Neto and Eze, for me, I'm thinking that we're not signing at 9 at that point. If we sign both those players, then we already have 5 wingers that could genuinely start for a lot of teams in the Prem. And then we have Richarlison and Son, and those are going to be the guys battling it out for the center forward position. So we'll just see which way Spurs lean. And for me, I think I'd rather sign an out-and-out striker than sign a Pedro Neto. And obviously, we feel about Eze, like sign him no matter what. He's the number one priority.
Above all else. Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if maybe that's why, like we just mentioned, the Tony links have cooled off a little bit, right? Is because these winger links have picked up. Another one I know we want to talk about is Desiree Doué from Rennes. I don't know much about him, to be completely honest. I've got a couple stats here that I can share. 42 appearances in all comps last season. That's 31 in Ligue 1, 5 in the Coupe de France, and 6 in Europa League, right? So that tells me he's starting virtually all their matches except 3 matches in Ligue 1, and I assume there's probably a reason for that other than ability, right? Injuries or unavailability, cards, whatever it is. And then if you peel back on the stats a little bit more, 4 goals last season, 4 assists. This is in Ligue 1. 4 goals, 4 assists, 8 contributions. But he created 2.38 goals from an XG perspective, 2.89 expected shots on target, long ball accuracy of 81%, which I think is kind of exciting in an AN system. And then an XA or expected assist of 3.72, which is fantastic. I mean, he's creating opportunities at an XA of 3.72, and it's France. I'm not going to be one of those people that goes on and on about it being a farmers league, but I will say that our experiences signing wingers from Ligue 1 have not been great, and so I think that always leaves me a little bit shy to this type of link. And I'm thinking Clinton NG, and I'm thinking Nkudu, right? Yeah. So, but yeah, what do you know about this kid, if anything, and what do you think?
I don't know too much. I saw that he was recently gonna play in the Olympics for France, and they're hosting. So keep an eye out for him there. He looks really exciting, and obviously the counting stats aren't jumping off the page right now. But he's 19 years old, and this is another signing where it's like our recruitment team is signing these young players, and who knows what they're going to do, whether they're going to loan them immediately out, which I'm a huge fan of because we saw how that worked out for Udogi and Sarr, and it's been fantastic recently when we have signed these teenagers, and obviously Bergvall and Gray now. And I think I just want us to get greedy. Like, I want us to sign him too. Like, you can never have too much youth talent. And obviously there is a price range where it gets a little bit ridiculous, but if we can get him in that 20 million range, like if they really think that he is one of those top talents, I'd say go for it. And France recently, like, you see the wingers that they've produced, like Barcola and Dembele, how good have they been? And obviously Mbappe, and then even not on the French team right now, you got Elise, and like these talents are coming out of that league. And if we can jump the gun on that's really exciting for me.
Yeah, well said. I have a hard time disagreeing with that. I think of Jeremy Doku as another winger who came out of League One, who's just been electric.
Same right? Club.
Good shout. Yeah. So yeah, it's exciting, and I didn't realize he was going to the Olympics. That makes me think that he will probably be the opposite of Elise on the wing for them potentially.
Hope so. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, I'm sure Elise will start. He'll be one of the first names on the team sheet for their Olympic group, right? But I'll be keeping an eye on the Olympics. I really like the U23 tournaments because a lot of times it's more of a U21 tournament, honestly, I think. So I'll be super stoked to tune into that for sure, and now even more so because he'll be there.
Yeah, but just a fair warning to people, Brian Hill was absolutely fantastic at the last Summer Olympics, so can't put too much stock into it. But
That's fair. Maybe just from a U.S. perspective, I'm just like, I'm ready for somebody to do something this summer.
Something else, yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I think the women's team is going to go crush at the Olympics. I'm super excited to see them under Emma Hayes, but yeah, not a United States soccer pod, so we'll keep it Spurs centric as much as possible. Couple other links that I think are worth just briefly touching on. I think they've cooled down a little bit for sure. One of them maybe not as much because I think the Euros are factoring in, but I know you're pretty high on Santi Jimenez. It's cooled down a little bit, but do you think there could be anything there still?
I think it's done. I think it was Paul O'Keefe, who is one of like my favorite sources. I think he's one of the most trusted sources for Tottenham on Twitter. So definitely give him a follow. I think he said that they're not interested in Jimenez. They'd rather pursue other players. I think he mentioned Xerxes, and maybe a couple other guys, but I think Jimenez is no longer on the short list for Tottenham. So I was high on him. Didn't pan out. I mean, I'm not devastated. There's plenty of other guys who are just as good, if not better.
So yeah, on that note, you mentioned the name Xerxes. I think that's a really exciting name. I watched quite a bit of Serie A. Actually, it's it's a close second to me as far as Premier League for the football that I watch. But I think he's really talented. I think he had obviously a great season. We all know that, right? But he was a huge part of Bologna's success. And he's a goal scorer for sure. I guess my question to you is, do you think Spurs can bring him in when we know there's other clubs competing pretty aggressively for his signature?
Yeah, I'm not super confident, but I mean, there's always a price, but Spurs aren't one to often match that. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that we'd be more willing to spend more on a guy who's played in the Premiership, whether that be Tony or Solanke or someone like that. Um, and yeah, the Xerxes links, they haven't been that hot, so I'm not super confident, but obviously would love to have him. It seems like a top player. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And for those who maybe are listening and aren't familiar, Joshua Xerxes, striker from Bologna, 20 years old, I believe. Don't hold me to that. Could be 21, but talented young striker who has a knack for putting the ball in the back of the net. But I know Juve is aggressively going after him. So there's going to be competition, and like you said, I don't see Spurs ponying up and paying over what they value someone at. We're just not a club that do that type of thing, and when we have, it hasn't worked out. So then I think the last one we'll probably want to mention is Calafiori, starting for Italy in the Euros. Right, we all know that he's somebody that the majority of Europe is going to be going after. It sounds like there's a reasonable release clause, but that they have a higher clause for Italian clubs. And so, for example, Juventus, it was reported that Juventus inquired about his services. Obviously, he would be following his manager in Thiago Motta to Juve if he were to end up at Juve, right? But Juve was told that they're going to have to pay double what anyone else would pay for his services. And I think a lot of that is because Serie A is just kind of sick and tired of Juve buying every talented youngster from every other team in the league, right? So Juve is going to be competition, but I think if Spurs want to really invest heavily in a position other than Eze, I think it's Calafiori. But what are your thoughts on him as, somebody to come in and compete for minutes at center back?
Yeah, obviously, I'm a huge fan of his. I think I mentioned him on our first podcast. Being a fan, and the Euros hype has just been insane for him. And I think that's really driven up his price tag to the point where the release clause might, I don't know. I just think there's too many clubs going. So if there is a release clause and he kind of gets to pick where he's going, I doubt he's going to pick Tottenham, especially with the center backs that we already have and how good Dragusin was these Euros, and he's our third choice. It's getting a little bit ridiculous, and it's a great problem to have. And I've heard Arsenal and Liverpool, and obviously Liverpool is a club in dire need for that position. I think that could be somewhere he goes. And then Arsenal, similarly, I think he is better than like Gabriel. So I think he maybe fits those clubs a little bit better than Spurs because our center back situation is so good right now.
Yeah. Well said. I completely agree with you. I hate saying it, but I'd be pretty surprised if he didn't end up at Arsenal. I think this was one of those links early in the window where we were only linked to him because all of Europe was linked to this guy, right? Just incredibly talented. And I'm of Italian heritage, and I'm a big Italian national team fan, and don't miss a minute. He did concede an own goal.
Yeah, he did.
Outside of that, he had a really good tournament. Italy just didn't have their shit together tactically at all, right? Unfortunately for him, but I think he had a pretty good tournament. But yeah, he'll end up at Arsenal. I think they'll come in and pay whatever Bologna is asking. Liverpool could very well do the same. But like you said, we're stacked at center back, and we don't need to go spend $65-70 million on another center back. And like you said, he's not going to want to come compete with Van de Ven, Romero, and Dragusin. It's just not going to happen. So I think we can kiss that one goodbye. But as an Italian American, it was really fun to think about for a little while.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then one more name too. I know I said that was the last name, but I'll ask you about Chiesa quickly because I think that's calmed down a little bit as well. I'm a massive fan. I think that he would thrive in an Ange Postecoglou system, but we've also talked ad nauseum about the depth we're going to have up top at the wing position. So do you think that one's cooled down to where it's not happening, or is there still a chance?
Uh, I think sneaky that there is a chance, and I might
Mhm.
like him over Pedro Neto
Yeah,
because of the durability, Champions League experience, winning experience,
yeah,
and um, price tag. Like they're saying 25 million for Chiesa, and that was a guy that I think it might have been 2022, but he was like one of the 20 best players in the world for a season at
yeah,
least.
yep.
So I was really excited by the prospect of that, and I think he's proven more than Neto. But recently, with the struggles that Juve have faced, and he's kind of been, I guess, like the face of the franchise there in like
Mhm.
their down period, and then Italy similarly. People have pointed a lot of blame at him, and I think a change of scenery would do him really, really good right now.
Well said. I think he'd be a much better signing than Neto as well. I think not only from an ability perspective and a fit, which I think Neto would fit really well into the system. Don't get me wrong, but he's going to cost half the price of Neto, right? Doesn't come with the injury concern. Knows Kulisevsky and Bentancur really well. He knows Paratici really well, which could bleed into some of this as well actually happening. We all know Paratici's still just hanging right outside the training ground, with a cigarette and a coffee, just throwing suggestions through the window or whatever it is. But yeah, I think there's an opportunity to bring him in. I'd be super excited about it. And you're right, Juventus and Italy both lean on him heavily from an attacking perspective this past season and past tournament. Juve, I watch a lot of Juventus. They couldn't create a chance that he wasn't involved in, like flat out point blank period. So I think a change of scenery would be good for him. And he was exhausted with the tactics, and that was well known. And he was not in good standings with his manager Allegri throughout the season. He played every minute because he had to, but and it sounds like Thiago Motta is not a fan, so it sounds like he's out. And if we can get him for 25 million, let's go. Yeah, and then I know we want to talk about outgoings too, and this will be fair, for the most part how we wrap up the show. The first name that we'll talk about because it is confirmed, and you already mentioned it earlier when we were talking about Archie Gray, but Joe Rodon has officially made his move to Leeds United. I think it's a great move for him. But yeah, what would you want to say to close out the Joe Rodon tenure at Spurs?
Yeah, I mean, again, not much of a tenure. Can't really remember what we paid for him, but was decently excited because he was good at Swansea. So
There's 14 mil.
14 mil. I mean, take 10 mil off the Archie Gray signing. I mean, I think that's fair and honestly pretty happy with that. And I wish him the best, honestly. He was a pretty solid player for what it was worth, just not up to our standard.
Yeah, agree. I think he found his level at Leeds. Top, competing for a championship, competing for status in the Premier League, battling relegation is right about his level, right? So I think it's perfect for him. I think when you talk about the fact that we got a couple loan fees for him, it almost balances out 14 to 14, right, with what we ended up paying for him. And I think I'm a fan of the club taking punts on that type of guy because who knows? He could have really taken off and soared. And if he did, 14 million is a good little price tag for somebody who really takes off. And you never know what's going to happen until you give a guy a chance, and we did. And like you said, he found his level. So I wish Joe Rodon all the best. His little brother was like a famous Spurs fan for a couple months, and that was probably the high point of his time at Spurs was all that engagement, right? But no, I wish Joe all the best. And then it's not been made official yet, but there was maybe some rumors of Skip going in a similar direction as Rodon, right? And Skippy is one that I would maybe hate to see go, but I think it would be the right time for that to happen.
I would hate to see him go as well. The fact that he wasn't involved in the Gray deal, or at least around that time, makes me think he's not going to Leeds, which was one of the clubs that he was mainly linked to.
Yeah.
But you definitely could see him going to like a mid-table, like relegation side, like even like maybe like Ipswich, who's like just buying players. And
Mm-hmm.
like Spurs, obviously, it's all profit academy boy, which is always hurts more to sell. But I think I
Yeah.
would be okay with it. But I would also be okay with keeping him. I'm pretty indifferent. I'm a fan of his. Just wish him the best for his career. So
Yeah. I'm right there with you. And that's why I think maybe I lean a little bit more towards it's time to go Skippy for his sake. I would hate to see him, where he's going to be in the pecking order of Spurs. I just don't think he's going to get a ton of minutes at the club. And I mean, he competed at the highest level, was one of the first names on Jose Mourinho's team sheet, right? Skippy did some exciting things at Spurs, and he's still so young to where he could have a really, really promising career that flourishes if he finds himself at the right place. So, like you said, I'd love to see him at a mid-table team. I think Everton would be a really nice place for him to end up too. I'm just throwing it out there and manifesting it. I haven't seen anything around Skip to Everton, right? But a team where he's going to get to play in a low block and and be more of that playmaker when he has opportunities to do so. I think he'll do a good job there. And but whatever it is, like you said, I wish him all the best. Sticking with midfielders, it could be on the way out. PEH. There's rumors that he's going to end up elsewhere, and I'm sure the Euros are maybe dragging that out a little bit. But we've heard Napoli. We know Conte is a fan. We've heard Milan. What are your thoughts on PEH taking off?
I just can't wait for him to take off. Honestly, no disrespect to him, but he's gonna be one of our guys that fetches a larger or like a bit larger sum there because he
Yeah.
is a good player.
Yeah.
And I think he would be great in Serie A. And I think he should just get started on his new preseason, and we'll take the money and get a 6. So yeah,
Yep. Let's go. I agree, man. I think it's best for all parties, and I think he's an amazing player.
good
He just not.
career. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. He's gonna do good things for the next 5 years, and great player. Just didn't fit the Ange Postecoglou system. He also was the second highest in terms of appearances this past season at Spurs, which is kind of a mind-blowing stat, right? So he served his function, and he deserves to go start for another team. So I wish him all the best, and thanks for the money. Emerson too. That's another one that it sounds like he'll be taken off, and I think he was going to fetch us, 18 million probably as an absolute basement, right? It could be more than that, but kind of the same situation as PEH, right? Good little player. It just doesn't really make sense for Spurs anymore. And thanks for the money, right?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, can't beat the vibes on the guy, but
Yeah.
just not up to standard with the football. And I just can never get that tweet out of my head that like Barcelona are over the moon that Tottenham paid 25 mil. Like they can't believe it. I was like, oh, okay. So yeah,
Perfect.
that's his legacy.
Yeah. Hey, well, at least maybe get us your money back. And I actually saw a hilarious tweet today that said if Barcelona can't get another loan done for João Cancelo, then they might come back and try to buy Emerson from Spurs. So this a whole full circle moment. Some of these guys are going to fall upwards as they leave Tottenham, right? They're going to end up in the Champions League and whatever else. But wish them all the best. Jed Spence, that one might get interesting. I mean, it's obvious he's going to leave, right? But it sounds like Genoa is dragging their feet a little bit, and we all know our chairman is going to let that drag and drag and drag. So, I guess maybe my question is, are you confident he does end up? And then if the answer, and does it confident he ends up leaving? And then if the answer is yes, are you confident it's Genoa where he ends up?
I think if he leaves on a permanent, it's going to be Genoa. I think there is a possibility that he gets loaned out again. It doesn't sound like Ange is a fan. I would have liked to see him in preseason, but obviously it doesn't seem like it's working out. That's one of those signings like you take him from the championship. It's really exciting, and it just didn't work out. But I'm okay with taking those risks, like you said, on those players that could be really top talents. Because for the most part, recently it's paid off. He's one of the outliers there.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. I think you were spot on. It's one of those things that didn't quite work out, but he's a good little player and he'll find his home for sure. And then Donley on loan. That's the last one we'll talk about here. I know you're a big fan. I'm a big fan. Reports that Oxford United, who are in the championship, are sniffing around for a loan. Bristol City in the championship. Bristol Rovers in League One. Luton, of course, in the championship most recently. Birmingham City is interested, and they're also in League One. Any of those clubs that I've listed strike you as a good fit for Jamie Donnelly?
Yeah, so I think the one that I would prefer him to go to is Luton Town.
Yeah.
Because of the way they play, especially in the championship. They were really progressive with their football and like attack minded. And I think that suits kind of mirrors how Tottenham would play and also are going to be in those higher places in the league. Contrasting to that is Oxford United, who are likely going to be playing in a low block, probably a 4-4-2, doing everything they can to stay in the championship. And I don't know if that's going to be a good situation for Donnelly to be in, which is why I might even prefer like a Birmingham City, who is likely, if I had to guess, getting back promoted to the championship next year from League One and will likely dominate League One because just the stature of that club. They're a bigger club. They're too big for League One. And they have developed good players in the past too. So
Jude Bellingham is one of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. I think, I'm a little cold on League One, but I think if it's Birmingham City, I agree with you. I think he'll get a chance to win a title, most likely. Tom Brady's going to throw a little bit of cash at that club and get him out of League One. Great. I completely agree with you. So I think Birmingham City would be great. And then like you, I think Luton Town is the premier destination for him to end up on a loan. I think he's at a point right now where, I think making the jump from the U21 level, the Premier League 2 to the Premier League is insane. We've talked about that. That's like probably 30 levels of football you're jumping, right? But League One makes a lot of sense. And if he ends up in the championship, I think that tells me that this dude is like legitimately the real deal, right? I think if a Luton Town comes in and says, first of all, we're not going to let a player get loaned out who's not going to play, right? So if Luton Town were to come in and say, we think you're good enough to make an impact, we're going to be competing for the championship, then again, I think we know that this kid is for real. So I think it'd be super exciting. But if it ends up Birmingham City, I think it's fantastic for his development too, and I wouldn't be upset. Yeah, so we'll see what happens with all this. Max and I both know all of this is hypothetical outside of Archie Gray, right? But these are things that we got to talk about. Majority of them, I think, are legitimate and could very well end up happening. But I want to close the show out with just a brief chat for all our American listeners here in Seattle on the U.S. men's national team. We're not a United States soccer pod, but we are massive soccer fans who are American and live in the United States. So, Max, I was at the game in Kansas City when Uruguay grouped us. I don't think that's where we got knocked out. I think it's a Panama match, right? So we can look at the whole deal. But what is your synopsis of what happened to the U.S. in the Copa America?
Yeah, so I'm so excited to talk about a match because all we've talked about our first 3 episodes are just transfers, and I love transfers, but also love talking about actual games because I can say something like this tournament was an absolute disaster, and Berhalter should not be the coach come Wednesday or whenever they're deciding that. As for the Panama game, obviously, Weah, you can't do that. Like that's you lost your head. You can't do that. You cost your team the tournament. But it's also not solely on Tim Weah because he's one of our better players and obviously a fantastic player for Juventus. You got to look at Berhalter. Like, why are we parking the bus against Panama for 90? I know we have 10 men. We're still better than them. We should be able to play them off the park with 10 men. We're miles better than Panama and Bolivia, and the fact that we're not making it out of the group with those two is insane. And the fact that we've conceded after taking the lead with 10 men off a great shot by Balogun. Shout out to him. Great tournament. You can't concede right away, and then after that, you still got to go for it. Like, that's not a game you can just dilly-dally, hope you get a point out of. Like, we have Christian Pulisic, we have Balogun, we have Gio Reyna, we have players that should be able to make something out of nothing, and it's just tragic. It's tragic management by Gregg Berhalter for me, and yeah, it's just awful. The Uruguay game outplayed, offsides, not offsides, doesn't matter. We couldn't score at all. The Panama game was just, it was malpractice.
I could not agree with you anymore. I think you go out and you beat Panama regardless of how many men are on the pitch. And I agree with you. Tim Weah can't be doing that. But if I look at Tim Weah and I look at Serginho Dest down in Trinidad in the build-up to Nations League, he got a silly red card for kicking a ball into the stands right after, I believe, a poor tackle, right? And those kind of things just tell me that they're not scared of repercussions from their manager for making stupid decisions on the pitch, right? Look at a guy like Sir Alex Ferguson, and I know it's a massive jump talking Gregg Berhalter to Sir Alex Ferguson, but a guy like Sir Alex Ferguson, his players don't fuck around on the field like that, right? Sorry for my language, listeners, but his players don't do what Tim or Serginho have done recently. So again, it's a bummer that Tim did that, but I don't put it on him. Tactically, Greg was inept. There's no reason you don't go out and beat a team whose best player plays for Houston Dynamo. And I'm a big Houston Dynamo fan, and I love Coco Carrasquilla, but he's the only thing Panama has going for him at any given time, and he's just not that good. And yeah, to see us act like we needed to give them the respect of Canada or Mexico or anyone better, right? With 10 men on the pitch was just silly and disappointing. And I blame Gregg Berhalter wholeheartedly. And the Uruguay game, I thought we came out actually pretty well. I think our plan tactically was to get the ball long and then press the shit out of them once we got the ball long, which against that team is, in my opinion, spot on tactically, right? But the problem was 60 minutes in or so, Uruguay figured that out. And as soon as they did, we didn't have a plan B. We didn't know how to react to them, understanding and bettering our tactics. And Marcelo Bielsa was not on the sideline, but we all know he's still involved. And we're talking Gregg Berhalter versus one of the brightest soccer minds in the history of the game in Bielsa, right? And we just got absolutely wiped tactically. I wasn't surprised at all, but I think we all expected to lose to Uruguay. And so that's where the Panama game just becomes absolutely unacceptable. And that's where it all fell apart. And I look at the last thing I'll say, and I'll give it back to you, but I look at these two cycles under Berhalter. One of them culminated in the Copa America on home soil, and the second one, which we're now in, right? The second one culminates in the World Cup on home soil. Very rarely does a manager get two cycles in international football. Guys like Deschamps do, but they're few and far between, right? Gregg Berhalter is no Didier Deschamps. So to give him these two most important cycles in the history of United States soccer is a travesty and is unacceptable, and is something that I'll just never really be able to forgive the Federation for. And now we're at a situation where we have a decision to make, and if it's not the right decision, we will have wasted two major tournaments on our home soil.
Yeah, it's pretty sickening when you actually think about it. Gregg Berhalter, he's not a Deschamps. He's not even a Jurgen Klinsmann, who
exactly.
the Federation was way harder on, and he had half the talent that Gregg has, and he did better in both tournaments, or he did as good against Belgium. Obviously, Tim Howard, what a performance. He made the semifinals of the Copa America, and then a year later, obviously, I was in this camp too. You have to fire him, but Gregg should have been fired long ago. He should have been fired when the Reina controversy happened.
Yep.
And it's not just like his management, his locker room management, which clearly hundreds of people have come out and been like, they love him in the locker room, blah, 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 because they're so comfortable, like you said, complacent, willing to do dumb stuff on the field. Because they're not scared of Gregg. They like the comfortability that he offers. And then his in-game management against Uruguay, you're pressing with Weston McKennie, who looks like so out of shape. Like Weston McKennie, good, nice, good tournament, honestly. But he was just too out of shape. You have to sub him off. And it's just, he didn't, and he's subbing off other players, and then he's not bringing on Musa, who is like perfectly suited to come on. It's just like, it's a perfect storm of a guy who is just too big for his britches right now in U.S. soccer, and like you said, on home soil, and coming up with the biggest tournament in U.S. soccer history. Like, we need a guy who's gonna be disciplined and willing to lead us, and a guy like Ange Postecoglou, because when in the press conferences have you heard Gregg Berhalter fired up at all? Like, he's mentioning XG in them. Like, I can't even. It's just insane to me. It's insanity. Yeah.
No, I completely agree, man. It was as a fan, I'm sitting in the stadium at Arrowhead. I'm listening to the Uruguay national anthem being sung behind me with the Uruguayan flag flapping right next to me, and Gregg Berhalter is clapping me. I'm like, Gregg, you just got grouped, bud. I don't want your claps. You just go ahead and head back to the locker room. I think he's a fine guy. I got nothing bad to say about Gregg as a human, but yeah, he like you said, he's in way over his head. That's on the Federation. It's not on Gregg. It's all in the Federation. They fire Gregg, like you said, or they don't fire Gregg. They kind of go. They will say this. They undergo an open relationship with Gregg for a few months, right? And they hire this search firm, we hear, to come in and help them use data to decide who the next manager should be. Not only do we pass up Julian Lopetegui in that search, and other guys like Jesse Marsh, who just so happens to have taken Canada to a semifinal.
Yeah, what round is he in? Oh,
yeah, exactly.
Worst
right?
team as well.
Right. And Jesse even came out and said there's a bad taste in his mouth about his experience interviewing for that position, right? So we pass up Marsh and Lopetegui. Lopetegui, for those who don't know, was maybe one of the top 5 managers on the planet only a few years ago, right? And recently left Wolves, if I'm not mistaken. So we had some big names in the mix. Thierry Henry as well, who hasn't been great as a manager, but he was still there.
He's managing France in the Olympics.
In the Olympics, yeah. And so we go through that process. We end up spending all this money for this search firm to come back and say, hey, you guys should just bring back the guy you just parted with. Perfect. Solution sorted, right? So we bring Berhalter back, and now we're in a situation where we either have to, in my opinion, we have to start over, right? Anytime you bring in a new manager. So we either go and find a guy like Jurgen Klopp and say, we'll pay you 3 times what you're worth. Please come manage us through the World Cup. And money is the only thing that talks in this situation for a guy like Jurgen Klopp. Or we hire a name like we're hearing in Steve Cherundolo and get the exact same situation that we're coming out of right now. And Steve's done a great job at LAFC, but I'm sick and tired of
can't hire MLS manager.
Can't, exactly. But my fear is that the Federation wants a yes man, especially a yes man who adheres to U.S. soccer, and there's people at the top of the federation who believe the best way to start winning World Cups is to invest in your domestic league and build this great American soccer product. We're so far away from that. And even with the Messi deal, Messi's going to retire in 12 to 18 months. Like,
Yeah.
it's been great for exposure, but like when it comes to thinking that we are talented enough and enough of a soccer nation to win the World Cup by building the MLS in our domestic program, we're playing ourselves real hard.
We're so naive to think that.
Exactly.
And the thing is, that thought process, in practice, it's correct. It's completely true. But
Yep.
our youth development system in this country is too fucked to even begin to fathom that process. And it's not changing anytime soon. When you have talking heads that are hired by Fox Sports doing every panel, Alexi Lala saying pay to play is the way to go. It's just, there's too many people at the top of US soccer that are okay and so complacent with the way that the federation is being handled right now and the youth development and the coaching, and that they don't want anyone to tell them they're wrong, that it's never going to get fixed. And the Jurgen Klopp point, don't get me wrong, I'd love Jurgen Klopp. I don't even want him to have to go through this, because American soccer culture does not deserve Jurgen Klopp and all the people in the federation that are going to be like, when we get knocked out in the round of 16 in the next World Cup, that are going to be like, oh, Greg and Jurgen did the same thing. They don't understand that it's systemic, and it's not changing anytime soon.
Well said, man. Well said. I got nothing to add. I would just say that for anyone listening from the States, we appreciate you letting us rant, right? And even those who are not from the States, but I think it's a really important conversation. And as we said, we're not a US soccer pod, but we are two Americans who are massive soccer fans. And I know there's plenty of Spurs fans who are also in the United States that share our pain. So we wish everyone the best moving forward. We'll see what happens on Wednesday with this big managerial reveal, and we'll go from there. But yeah, for Max and myself, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. It's been a good hour. We appreciate everyone who's tuned in. We put out a couple of tweets, and we should have gotten to this earlier in the episode. That's on me, but our YouTube page is now up, live, and running. So please check it out, subscribe, like, all of that. Yes, indeed. Point upwards. Yeah, there we go. But yeah, please like and subscribe. We're going to be recording everything on video and adding those videos to the YouTube channel, so you can tune in with us in more ways than just audio. And from time to time, we'll have tactical breakdowns that you'll want to make sure you are subscribing to be able to see and interact with and engage with. And lastly, if anyone from the Seattle area wants to be involved in the podcast, shoot us a DM. Right, we are the official podcast of Seattle Spurs, and not that we discriminate against those who are not from Seattle, but like I said, the official pod of Seattle Spurs. So if you're in the Seattle area, you're a Spurs fan, you want to talk Spurs, hit us up. If you're a Sonics fan, also hit us up. Right, I will hide my Aces hat that I'm wearing. I know we're in Stormtown, but I'm a big Kate Martin fan, so I'll get that out there. But yeah, like I said, for Max, for myself, for all of Seattle Spurs, we appreciate everyone who's tuned in. And as always, come on, you Spurs.
Come on, you Spurs.